movie does end with him having his little moment of celebrity with the cops. There's this pop culture element to the Starkweather story. He did have the country in his grasp for a few weeks.
Every year since 1989, the Library of Congress has selected 25 films to add to the National Film Registry. The criteria? The films must be culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant.
Each week on You're Missing Out, we take a look at one of these films to try and get to the heart of why they were selected and why they still matter.
This week, Tom Augustine joins us for Badlands.
Our guest today is a filmmaker and writer returning to the show. Tom Augustine is here, this time to discuss Terrence Malick's Badlands. Tom, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me again, guys. It's a real pleasure.
Welcome back. Welcome back. It's our pleasure, please. It's our pleasure to have someone that's lived in the trenches of the Alamo with us. That's a bond that will almost never be broken. It's like Vietnam buddies.
Yes.
Yeah, Vietnam buddies, or like Ride the High Country. It's like, we did some shit together, or Justified. We dug coal together.
Yeah. We still get the flashbacks. We still get the wake up in the night sweating.
Yes. So, we got, once we were planning this new season, I knew I wanted to try to get Tom on this show. Peek behind the curtains. I thought initially, let's maybe try to get him for Sheen as a Western connection from Ride the High Country last year. But then I was like, I've read his stuff. I've read his screenplays. I think this guy's going to be all in on Badlands. Let me just throw the two out at him. Let me see what connects. And he immediately like, Badlands, absolutely. Let's fucking go Badlands. I'm like, I fucking knew it. So
I'm sorry, Tom. I need to cut in here because I'm going to pull back the curtain a little further. That's not entirely true. Let's own up to this. Let's own up to this.
Don't lie to our crowd.
No, that's not entirely true because what actually happened with this, and what I think is funny, is that the reason that you sent over Sheen or Badlands is that what you said is accurate, that you're like, I've read his stuff. I really think Terrence Malick, right? I initially was the one where I was like, yeah, but I feel like it'd be fun to have him on for Sheen. And we thought about this, and it's the only time in the 5 years we've been doing this show where we just literally, you and I just argued about like, but I want them for this. Well, I want them for this. It was like a tug of war. So we said, like, let's just send them both over. And much like somebody going to a jukebox and picking a song off of Darkness on the Edge of Town, Tom selected Badlands. And that's what we're here to discuss today.
That is
another element we could talk about. As we were talking about off mic about how, worried about, maybe we not have enough stuff to talk about. And I was like, buddy, we're going to have so much stuff to talk about. And there we go. Another one, the Springsteen connection.
Yeah.
But
as New Zealand's biggest Springsteen fan, it's going to come up. I'm just going to tell you guys right now.
It's 100% going to come up. So I guess might as well, the usual jumping off point, Mr. Augustine, what is your history with Badlands and Malick in general? First time you saw it, what have you?
Well, Badlands was one of those films that you study in film school. And there was this immediate connection that was formed. But actually my throughway with Malick, and still my favorite Malick, is Thin Red Line. And that one kind of just introduced me to a new world of cinema, and I felt like I needed to go back and watch every single thing that he's made. Haven't seen Hidden Life yet, but I've seen all the others. And so, digging back through, and eventually you come upon Badlands, and I think I watched it with my girlfriend for the first time. We were in a little apartment here in Auckland, and just stunned. We just kept looking at each other and saying, this was the first feature that he made. This was the first thing he made. And just out the gate, he's rewriting the language of American cinema in his own image, and it's just, we've just carried it with us for a really, really long time. I mean, you can see the birth of a kind of Americana in his cinema that is still replicated today, but is also completely unique to him in a sense. Like, no one else can really do it better than him. And even though his style has changed and morphed a little bit since Badlands, It still feels fresh. It still feels current. You can go back to it time and time again. And when I started this kind of showing older films, lesser seen, lesser screened films here in New Zealand, we have this film club at the Capitol Cinema here in Auckland, and we show new films every month. And the first one we showed was Badlands because it's just it's a gateway in so many ways. It's a gateway for a lot of people into because it straddles the line between art house cinema of a certain sense, and it's still something that's really accessible. So I love it, man. I love Badlands.
What about you, Mike?
So I was thinking about how I was going to answer this as Tom was speaking. And so if anybody clocked me almost laughing, it's because the answer that I was prepared to give was the first Terrence Malick I believe I saw, or at least saw some of, and I was young, I was in high school, but the first Malick I saw was Thin Red Line. And my reaction was, I find this deeply dull and unpleasant. And then I sought out Days of Heaven, which is supposed to be, Days of Heaven is supposed to be like the one that everybody talked about, the one they show you in all the documentaries. And I went, I find this deeply dull and unpleasant. And so I was just very much like, fuck it, this is not my guy, right? And I think what the hell was it? It was The New World, right? Would have just come out around that time. And again, another case of like, I came on cable and I went, no, I'm not digging this. So I was like, this is not my guy. When I was in college, I was in film school, but this was like kind of me doing my own extracurricular, like, let's seek out the lists of the greatest films, right? And Badlands was on this list that I was looking at. So I got the disc from Netflix, just kind of being like, I want to watch all of the films on this list. I know this guy is not my guy, but Civil War style, let's just bite down on the wooden spoon and get our arm hacked off and then we'll move on. And then I watched this and fell head over heels for it. Right? I was just so entranced by it. And I don't know why that. I mean, obviously, we talk about it's his first film, right? And sometimes it's come up even earlier this season when Tom and I are talking about John Cassavetes, and like I really like Shadows, and Tom doesn't like Shadows that much, and for both of us, it's the fact that he hasn't really like solidified what his thing is yet.
Yeah,
so it hasn't gotten as purified.
Yeah.
But I think for me, part of why Badlands endures is, in my taste and my interest, and I've come around as Tom knows. When Tree of Life came out, I despised it. And then I revisited it like 3 years ago for a thing we were doing on Palme d'Or winners, where I really was just like, I've got it here. I should throw it on in the background. And I think it's one of the great American films of that decade now. So that real locked into me. And I think what really hits me with Badlands that doesn't with some of Malick's other films, I don't know why it is, but I just think like he is it's not anything new to say he's a very contemplative, sensitive and meditative filmmaker, right? It's to watch a Terrence Malick film is like reading a beat poet, right? It's like picking up something by Allen Ginsberg, right? And the thing about it is, if Allen Ginsberg is writing a poem and he's writing about a subject where I'm like, and I do love Allen Ginsberg. This is not me dismissing that, but like every once in a while I'd pick up an Allen Ginsberg poem that's just getting real into like the Caddish or something. I'm like, I have nothing to latch onto here. So it's kind of just a guy musing in a lot of big words for 30 pages. But when he writes Howl or America or one of these ones, you're just like, everything's clicking. And I think for me, Badlands and Tree of Life is an extension, but Badlands is just watching a very contemplative man meditate on a subject that I also find deeply fascinating, with Charles Starkweather and with that phenomenon of violence and thrill killer, young folks on the road, all of that. So I think it just, even though Terrence Malick is not necessarily my guy, it's simply because I think it's how he uses that vision of his and how he uses that brain of his. And when he's doing it on a subject that clicks for me, I'm all the hell in. Does that make sense?
No, I get that. I mean, me and Tom were talking a little off mic about that kind of thing, about how even more than the Bonnie and Clyde story, the Starkweather thing seems to really connect more, not just to it seems like the viewing audience, but particularly for creatives, writers, storytellers, in whatever medium, that this story seems to latch onto our just that storytelling sensor in our brain of just like, ooh, there's something really here that we just we even more than Bonnie and Clyde. There's something about it, and I'm sure we'll get into it in the episode about why, in particular, this really does just hit us so hard. So I don't have that dissimilar a history with Malick as Mike does. Although a little bit, because the first movie I saw of his was The Thin Red Line, and I actually really liked it, but I did see it in high school, so I could probably chalk that up to, I was in high school, it's a World War II movie, I kind of latched onto that. But then, in high school, one of our teachers showed us The New World, and I didn't like that. Tree of Life came out, didn't really like that. What else? And iconically, one of the most, like, that big gap between Days of Heaven and Thin Red Line turned him into this mythic figure. Another bit like semi big gap between Thin Red Line and New World, big gap between New World, and then all of a sudden, he like shits out like 5 movies in 4 years, it seemed like, and now he's gone again. What was the last one? Hidden Life, the World War, the Nazi movie. Wasn't that already like 4 years ago at this point? And it's like, where's Malick? And it's like,
well, I mean,
I don't know.
Let's not forget, he also executive produced a documentary on deceased rapper Lil Peep.
That's right. Okay, what a guy.
Fucking favorite trivia fact in this goddamn world. just because, like, listen, we can make fun of, as we often do on this show, Kyle's taste in or not taste in music, but like the music that Kyle will listen to, and he'll just come and go like, as we've brought up before, his rappers of Lil Percocet or whatever they are. We make jazz at that, but it's not even about that, right? I am not being dismissive of Lil Peep. I'm not saying people shouldn't listen to Lil Peep. What I am saying is Terrence Malick knowing who Lil Peep is doesn't make sense. Listen, I like listening to Doichi now and then, I enjoy it. But like, if you told me like Thomas Pynchon was listening to that, I'd be like, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense.
I think with Pynchon that would kind of make sense.
Yeah, I love the idea of Malick like staring intently at like a leaf on a tree while he's blasting Lil Peep and hands.
I mean, that's one of those things where you love these auteurs where they just like, you think they're gonna like certain things and then they just throw these curveballs, and it's like when Nolan goes like, oh yeah, I love Michael Bay movies, or you find out that Ingmar Bergman liked fucking Ocean's 11 was like his favorite movie that he just repeatedly rewatched until like he died, and it's just like, what the fuck is that? Like, all right, dudes rock essentially. But yeah, so I didn't latch onto him so hard, but I like I was telling Tom off mic, I started making a concerted effort towards the end of college and definitely after the end of college of trying to broaden my horizons. Very like trying not to be these kinds of people in the film loving world where it seems like they don't love movies, they love the movies they love. And I didn't want to be that guy. There's too much stuff. We're connected globally now, so I could watch European stuff, Asian stuff, any fucking movie I want from any part of the world, I can watch it. There's too much stuff. I don't want to do that. So let's broaden our horizons. And Badlands, I watched. It's definitely over 10 years at this point because it's not logged in my letterbox the exact date I watched it. So it's been a while. But I got it on Criterion. I watched that, and I was like, okay, I think maybe I unlocked something here with this guy. It's definitely more mainstream than most of, honestly, all of his stuff. Let's be honest. It's a 90-minute movie about Martin Sheen killing people and Sissy Spacek reciting voiceover against lush backdrops. There's violence, there's war notes, there's something for everybody. But then, I go back and I'm like, let me rewatch The Thin Red Line, get a new appreciation of that. You know what? Criterion just put out The New World. Let me watch that. And honestly, I think The New World is my favorite Terrence Malick movie, if I'm being completely honest. Now, to be fair, I haven't seen his post Tree of Life stuff because weren't getting the greatest reviews until A Hidden Life, but I do want to get more into them. But I think if you're willing to open yourself up to what this guy is what he's laying down, the lush, meditative, poetic storytelling that he's going for, and again with the kind of visual storytelling, cinematography that really is. There's 1,000 imitators, but there's only one real one. And you watch this shit, especially with these restorations that are coming out, and you go, fuck. If nothing else, this guy has an eye unlike anybody else. And then you get into his meditative stuff about, violence and spirituality and, whatever movie it is. And you just go, okay, this may not be something you watch like when you're feeling down and you need a pick me up, or you're kind of like only half paying attention to what's on screen. But if you're in the mood to watch something that's going to take your full attention and take you on a journey that no other filmmaker, at least an American filmmaker, is going to give to you, he's become quietly one of my guys. That run of his up to Tree of Life, and I do, like I said, I do want to get more into his post Tree of Life stuff. But we're here to talk about Badlands. So do we want to hit the introduction?
I'll cue it up. Yeah. Well, before we talk anymore about what we thought of Badlands, let's hear what the National Film Registry had to say. Here's what the Library of Congress has to say about Badlands.
Badlands. Stark, brutal story based on the Charles Starkweather Caril Fugate murder spree through the Midwest in 1958, with Martin Sheen as the killer lashing out against a society that ignores his existence, and Sissy Spacek as his naive teenage consort. Sheen is forceful and properly weird as the mass murderer, strutting around and pretending to be James Dean, while Spacek doesn't quite understand what he's all about, but goes along anyway. Director Terrence Malick neither romanticizes nor condemns his subjects, maintaining a low-key approach to the story that results in a fascinating character study. The film did scant box office business, but it remains one of the most impressive of directorial debuts.
So that's what the Library of Congress had to say. I think if I can throw something out, I was watching the Making Badlands feature on the Criterion, and it begins with Martin Sheen talking about the Starkweather case being something that fascinated basically everyone of their generation, right? Which is similar to what you were saying up top, Tom, about even more than Bonnie and Clyde Starkweather. And I was thinking about that and why it fascinates. And I think, not that anybody wants to hear us wax nostalgic, but like it certainly fascinates. We should say, we quite literally came very close, you and I and past guest of the show, Jake Kim, to making a Badlands-esque, Natural Born Killers-esque kind of thrill killers movie as our senior thesis films in college. We had this grand, ambitious idea that, like all films, falls apart when you realize you need money to do it. Which is this strange thing about the medium of cinema is money is a problem. But it is something that fascinated us as well. And I think talking about Starkweather and why that has latched onto people so much is, to me, and I don't know how you guys feel, but I think it's the fact that, like, Bonnie and Clyde and any of the other famous criminals before that, right? Whether it's Dillinger or what have you, they're robbing banks. They're killing people and taking their money. They're doing all of that. And when you go, well, why did Bonnie and Clyde do what they did? Money, right? And love and thrills and what have you. But like, our brains can at least comprehend, like, they shot people and took their money. And Starkweather was something that America had to contend with the idea of, as, again, we'll bring him up, as Bruce Springsteen talks about in Nebraska, why'd you do it? Well, sir, there's just a meanness in this world, right? It's just a thing that is unfathomable in a way, right? And the reality of the situation is Charles Starkweather was just a mentally ill, shitty dude who groomed a child and molested her and shot a bunch of people.
Yeah.
But we can't deal with that. So we kind of have to project narratives onto it, right? And we kind of have to project some meaning onto it. And the reason I'm thinking about that in a way is I'm thinking about, and this is, we're not going to get too in the weeds of this, but I do think it's relevant now in terms of like couple months back, we had a fairly noteworthy shooting here in the city of New York of an insurance CEO. And before they arrested someone, before we knew anything about the alleged shooter, and I say alleged so we don't get sued, before we know anything about that, right? Before we knew anything, how many people were already going like, well, they must have been somebody, they must have lost a loved one to cancer, they must have been denied this treatment, they must have been denied, blah, 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 blah. Then the accused is arrested, and people just started kind of picking elements of their story to go, see, that justifies the narrative I've written. And then there was other stuff where they were like, well, yeah, but they said he had back pain. He probably couldn't get out of bed. And they're like, no, he got out of bed fine. It's like, put that away. Put that away. My story is. And it's like, because it's an act of violence that we want to project our feelings onto, right? We want to project our thing. So with Starkweather, despite the fact that even Caril and Fugate was very adamant about, like, this guy kind of trafficked me, like, across state lines. Like, this was not good. Every artist that comes along and finds the Starkweather story, it's like, yeah, I remember when one of my girlfriend's old man said, I don't want you coming around here no more. And boy, I could have just shot him. And like, they just project that onto this story. So at least to me, and I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this and why you think the Starkweather story, hits. But to me, it's not dissimilar to something we've talked about before on the show with, like, whether it's Elvis Presley or Marilyn Monroe or these or Lou Gehrig, these characters that just become, they stop being historical figures, they become American folklore, and they become symbols of whatever we want them to be in the moment. But please, whoever wants to go first, like, what
Tom,
fascinates
I'll let you
with,
take that back.
Yeah,
take
please.
that swing.
Yeah, well, I think you touched on something that's very true about America, at least in my experience, is this idea of myth making. And so much of America is about the narratives that whoever's making the narrative wants to believe, and that kind of thing. And also that kind of romantic notion of the way violence and freedom intersects in any great American story of, any kind of, as you say, folkloric tale. And, you talk about Bonnie and Clyde, you can also talk about, like, John Dillinger, you can talk about, like, someone like, like, even like the Luigi Mangione case, any of those kinds of stories, there is this kind of this really rich intersection of an America that's been founded in violence, which has freedom on the mind constantly. And it's something that is still very, very current and very much thought about when we consider America, as much as it was back then. I mean, it is no coincidence that there are two great artists, Malick and Springsteen, who were at the same time fascinated by the subject and started, made these kind of eternal pieces that speak to America as it was, America as it is now, and are just totally enduring because, there's this fascination with how much do we actually know about these myths? How can we reinterpret them? How can we tool them towards suggesting something ineffable, or can we tool them to political means? Can we tool them to proving my point, etc., etc.? We're just fortunate that the two most enduring works of art about this have that kind of mystery to them, a certain amount of mystery to them, a certain amount of interpretability to them. They're not just romantic, even though Badlands is romantic in its own way, even though Nebraska is romantic in its own way. That's not all they are. There's more to them. There's something that stays with you that's a little bit disturbed, a little bit unsettled. But sorry, I hope any of that made sense.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
No,
Absolutely.
totally makes sense. I'm digging where you guys are coming from with all of that. I definitely agree that all of that is definitely a part of it. I think there's two things that I think of to add on to what you guys are saying about why the Starkweather case, which then informs Badlands' everlasting appeal. One thing is that I think what sets this apart so much is that it is senseless, that there is no grander motivation, and in a way it sort of functions similarly to, maybe a weird comparison to make, but I think it makes sense, to the way the Michael Myers mask works, which is it's so blank that you can start putting your own interpretations onto it. So where Badlands is going to have similarities to Nebraska, they're two separate artists. They're kind of have different things behind the meanings of the movie or the album. Where me and Mike were talking about, we almost did a Badlands Starkweather inspired thing in school. Tom was telling me off mic before you got in Mike, was that he also thought about at one point doing a Starkweather thing, and if that happened, coming from a different artist and coming from a completely different culture in New Zealand, a completely different thing that you would put in place of this empty void. Because unlike a Dillinger or Bonnie and Clyde, or any of those other mythic figures before Starkweather, there was the capitalistic, they're criminals, they're kind of just making money and kind of just doing all that stuff, where this guy's just killing people. Why? Kind of just cause. Like it's like he's just mentally ill, but I think that's a almost nicer way to put it than he was just a sociopath. And it almost feels miraculous watching this movie now, because we get a Starkweather essentially almost every week now, with these mass shooters that just have no motivation other than, I just wanted to kill people. And it's like, oh, great. So that's the new epidemic.
Well,
And
I'm sorry. Yeah.
well, I'll just say quickly. I think the second thing that makes this story so specifically American, and so again, the story is so impactful, especially on creatives, is that there is a pop cultural element to the thing, which is that Starkweather is, while there is no motivation to his thing, he's a guy that's trying to act like James Dean. He's trying to act like someone he saw in the movies, that he was like, this is what a cool guy is. This is how a cool guy dresses. This is how a cool guy talks. This is how he moves, etc., etc. And so for a guy, almost one of probably the earliest case of the pop culture affecting a killer discussion, is that, well, what are stories doing to us? Do the stories affect us, or do we affect the stories? Is it maybe a little bit of, the movies don't affect us, but the movies maybe inspire us, kind of like the Billy Loomis line in Scream: movies didn't make me crazy, movies just made me more creative. So I think there's that element to why the Starkweather thing is so, it latches onto us, because we then have to start thinking about, okay, maybe are we culpable in this because this guy, while not trying to, like, oh, James Dean was a killer and all of this, but like he was very specifically trying to live his life in an aesthetic way of a popular movie icon, and that's, I think, something that it's kind of important to this narrative.
Well, I think too, though, and I don't mean to just get too kind of maybe Freudian out the gate, but Tom, you made a comment where you said, "Well, we have a Starkweather every week with these mass shooters, right?"
Mhm.
But we don't, right? They're a different thing.
They are, yeah.
Well, but and the reason is primarily those are disaffected young men pissed off that they can't get laid, or a million other things too. But with the incel crowd and all that. And the thing about Starkweather, and the thing about these kind of thrill killer stories inspired by it, be it Badlands or Natural Born Killers or True Romance or California, a million of them, right? Is that at their core, they're not about killing. They are to one degree or another. Malick is meditating on violence, things like that. But they're not about killing. They're about sex. They are very much this idea. Why we're drawn to them is the fact that when you're young and in America, right? You're in high school or what have you. Sex is an act of rebellion, right? Sex is a thing that you're doing that you're not supposed to be doing, right? Mm-hmm. It's a thing that, like, oh, that girl's pop is going to get mad if she catches me around. It's all about sex. Sheen has that line in the film where he's like, I'm so glad I met your daughter because before that I couldn't, when somebody asked me, how's your girl doing? I couldn't answer because I didn't have a girl, right? And it's not like the father is even saying, Warren Oates is not saying, don't hang around him. He might murder people with a gun. He's like, no, he's gonna not him. And the whole fact that, like, these thrill killer movies, it's not just boy, girl, gun. It's boy, girl, gun, car, right? And when you're young, and this is what Bruce Springsteen writes about a lot, boy, girl, car, what's happening in that car, right? Yes. It's this thing, it's this rebellion, it's this danger, and every person who has tackled one of these stories, right, every filmmaker, is bringing their approach to kind of how they view, or how they viewed, especially when they were young, sex, because it also is a thing of, like, again, it feels crazy, especially as you get older, right? And I'm not trying to give insight into anyone's, personal life or anything like that, but, like, this idea of, like, once you're approaching middle age, and you're like, well, I'm married now. This is just a thing we do, but some part of your brain from when you're a young man in America, like, there's still that part of your brain where you could be, looking at your wife of 10 years and still go like, shit, do I need to get out of here before her parents come home? You know what I mean? It never leaves your brain. And I think that when you look at Badlands at its core, right, part of what makes that interesting is, whereas a Natural Born Killers or a True Romance, they're about sex and there's a real romanticism to sex, Malick's fascination is evidenced in that great scene where they have sex and Sissy Spacek's just like, so is that it? That's how that's supposed to go? Yeah, it's that. And you almost feel like the Terrence Malick, when I don't know his life for sure, but you almost feel like when Terrence Malick was in high school, he was looking at all the jocks hooking up with the cheerleaders going, I don't get it. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? This is all weird. You're all psychopaths,
But yeah, I mean, it's not an especially erotic movie. No. It's actually, I would say it's not erotic. It's not. It's romantic in a certain sense, I suppose, but not in a, like, classically romantic way. And yeah, I think you have definitely hit on something there where I think there's this sort of global view of America as this kind of youthful place, and there's this idea in America of bucking authority, which I think is very, very prevalent all the way through the history of America. This, like, you can't tell me what to do, fuck your authority, blah, blah, blah. And I think that has something to do with the kind of sexual undertones of youth and also of bucking authority, and it's all tied into one another. And so it's interesting. It's interesting that Malick has all that seemingly in mind and yet doesn't fall for it, doesn't kind of, in the way that, say, Natural Born Killers or True Romance, they do have that kind of really rich vein of erotic romance. This is it's unplugged. It's not, it's like he's watching it from afar. He has this kind of ability to zoom out a little bit, and really drill down into what's fueling this, I suppose. Yeah, it's fascinating.
And it's definitely played out in the way the movie's structured, with Sissy Spacek's narration giving it that feel of like all the stuff that we're talking about with regards to the sex, and how it's almost like just not even disinterested, but almost like disgusted with the sex that is essentially on display in this movie. That it's her looking back on this part of her life and being like, yeah, so this happened, and now with being a grown up who's married to a lawyer and not a 15-year-old girl who was easily swayed by a good looking guy, but then quickly realized he was kind of a dumbass who was full of shit. That she would look back on this and kind of be like, there was nothing, like, I can't look at this in a romantic way anymore. I can't look at it as what happened was sexual or passionate or romantic. Just like, yeah, this was a thing, and I can understand why I did it, but yeah, that disconnect of like the adult mind looking back on the youthful mind and being like, how many times can we look back on the things that we did when we were kids, and like, kids are fucking stupid and crazy, and like we can look back on it and laugh, but we could also look back on, I mean, maybe in particular relationships, and be like, oh yeah, I remember I had this relationship in high school or when I was in college, and like, yeah, now I look back on it and I can't really look on it as a particularly good moment in my life. So
Well, I mean,
adding on this element of, oh, I was also a 15-year-old who was groomed by a 25-year-old psychopath to travel across state lines and kill innocent people for no reason.
Yeah.
It definitely is a smart way to frame this story, especially knowing how Malick would tell stories going forward, and his almost like very direct attempt to de-glorify violence in his movies, even if he's going to tell stories that are inherently very violent.
And yet it's interesting because, I mean, I kind of want to ask you guys, do you like Starkweather in the film? Do you kind of like, knowing all this intellectually, do you still feel like when you're watching it, like, yeah, I kind of like this guy, like when you're watching it?
Do you want to take that first, Tom, or do you want me to take that first?
Well, I just finished talking, so I'll let you take that.
Absolutely not. And I don't mean that in a moralistic sense, right? I think it's this thing of like, and this is just me, right? I'm gonna tie this back to our Cassavetes episode too, in a way, which is like, one of the things that I struggle with sometimes, and I'm not saying Malick is the same, but like sometimes when I'm watching these films that are like a meditation on masculinity, right, and the conflicts of masculinity, my impulse is to just look at these characters, go, just shut the fuck up, just shut the fuck up, like. And the Starkweather in this, which I like and is effective, is like, to me, he's just a loser. Like, he's just he is not a demonic force of evil like Mickey Knox. He's not like a hopeless romantic like Christian Slater's character in True Romance, whose name escapes me now. Clarence, right? He's not one of those, right? He is just a drag, right? Like, that's the biggest thing, is he's just a bland drag. He's not dissimilar to like the characters in Two-Lane Blacktop, where you're just kind of like, I don't think you have anything to offer here. To me, part of what I love about the very stark contrast between the man we hear described by Sissy Spacek in the voiceover and the man we see in the film is it's somebody. Even Sissy Spacek, as she's narrating this, is trying to impart meaning on this man and trying to impart meaning on this experience. It reminds me of Tom Augustine. I don't know. Are you a James Joyce fan by any chance?
I think I have tried to read Ulysses and failed miserably. But Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, my mum's favorite book.
Oh, I have it right over here on my shelf behind me. So in Ulysses, one of my favorite chapters of Ulysses, it's the Nausicaa chapter. And the way it works is, Leopold Bloom. This is, for anyone listening, spoilers for a novel that's over 100 years old and you've either already read or you're not going to read it. Let's face it, you're not going to do it. You're going to tell yourself you are and you won't. There's this chapter where Leopold Bloom is out wandering by the beach and we're coming from this young woman's perspective. There's a young woman on the beach sitting on a rock. And it's written in this very flowery, romantic novel language, right? As she's discussing the way that the waves crest on the sand and all of this. And she notices Leopold Bloom standing behind a wall on the beach, and she notices he's masturbating, right? To her. And it's this whole long thing of like, I always worried that my face was not pretty enough, and now this man is drawn to me. And it is this long, very poetic, it's satirizing romance novels of the time as she talks about like the way that she lifts her skirt a slight bit so he can get a better look, the mystery in his eyes. What was he thinking? Was he imagining them together in a bed? Was he This whole thing goes on. Fireworks go off in the air just as Leopold Bloom climaxes, and then we cut to Leopold Bloom's narration going, "Oh, I got something on my hand. Better wipe it off. All right, zip up my pants. Time to leave." And it's very much Bloom kind of making fun of the way that, like, we're romanticizing. Like, look at the lengths that this young woman goes to create this fairy tale narrative around a creepy dude masturbating on an Irish beach. And I couldn't help but think, because Malick is an intellectual in that regard, like that cut in the film from her giving this very poetic narration of what a mystery he was, right? And like what was behind his eyes and what he was thinking and all of that. And then immediately cutting to them post-coitus and her going, "Is that all? Was that how it was supposed to be?" "Yep." "Was it good?" "Yep." Yeah, like that is the Nausicaa chapter. Like that is again just this example of like how we can create these narratives for ourselves, because otherwise you just slept with a really dull, soulless guy, But like she has to make it this mystery. Who is this mystery man and all of that? So,
Yeah. I don't like him either. And it's really just because as a guy, and I think the three of us can, while different in many ways, we're still men, that we've dealt with a lot of guys like this in our days. Plenty of them we shared at Alamo, other walks of life. You deal with them when you go to a bar or a party, a work event, or your girlfriend says, "Oh, we got to go to this thing," whatever. And it's always those guys that try to dress the best, try to have their hair look as good as possible, where they clearly don't have an original bone in their body, but they're always talking and they always think they're saying something deep, when really you just listen. It's like, not only are you not saying anything deep, what you're saying is essentially like even more boring version of small talk. Like the scenes of him just like trying to be deep into the dictaphone in throughout the movie, and it's essentially just empty nonsense platitudes that he thinks are like cool. Or like the first time he takes her for a walk, and it's like an awkward scene because he's like, they're just walking in silence, and then he'll just like say something like, "Yeah, I like to talk about things sometimes," and he's just like, fuck, man, I deal with these goddamn jagoffs so much like that. But it's also, again, as guys, the annoying thing where you go, yeah, but this idiot always manages to find girls that, whether it's like they know it or not, it's like, oh, we're imparting all of this thing. We're trying to impart a thing onto him instead of just admitting, well, he's hot and we wanted to get laid, so but we don't want to be that crass. But in this case, you also get why a 15-year-old girl who, you know, mother died young, lives alone with her father. They moved from their home to a new state. And she lives with the kind of father who, when he finds out she's, stepping out with Martin Sheen, shoots her fucking dog as a punishment. You're like, okay, this girl maybe is kind of primed to get picked up on by this empty vessel in a James Dean fucking Spirit Halloween costume. So yeah, this kind of guy, like, yeah, I hate these kinds of guys. I deal with them at bars all the time. Sometimes have to kick them out of bars every now and then. But yeah, no, but I think again, it works to what Malick is getting to, which is even more than like what Bonnie and Clyde did. What 5 years before Badlands came out, which is, demythologizing these characters in a way by, both movies basically saying the guys in these stories are dumb. They are not rip roaring heroic guys, like Clyde in that movie when he kills the guy on accident. He starts like freaking out and he's like, "Oh my god, what the fuck? Like, oh, this isn't cool. Like, this isn't fun. This isn't." And in this, he's just like, it almost feels like just an accident that he kills Warren Oates. That it's just like, "Oh, hey, I told you to stop. I'm gonna shoot now," and it's like, "Oh, well, I guess I have to just keep doing this now." Or like when he brings the two people in the storm shelter and he just shoots between the door. "Oh, you think I got him?" It's like, buddy, you're just an asshole, man. You're just an idiot.
Well, it's funny you say that, Tom. Another thing about the Starkweather stand-in in this film that I think is interesting is that what Martin Sheen said he saw in him was this was a young man who felt like he was important, and that he was supposed to do something of meaning, and people just haven't noticed that importance yet, right? And he talked about it coming from his perspective as a young actor, not getting a lot of opportunities and feeling like, well, no, I can act. Somebody's just got to call me into a room, right? And realizing like how much of this, whether it's the film industry, the theater industry, anything like that, right? How much of it is somebody just being asked like, well, why don't you come do this, right? Somebody taking notice, right? And picking up, and the frustration that comes from not being noticed, right? And wanting to be special. It's interesting because in a strange way, and I'm not giving anything away here. I'm going to discuss a new film, but like, I know you haven't, Tom, Lorenzo, Tom Augustine. Did you see, or are you at all going to go see Thunderbolts?
I was going to go and see it this evening, I think.
Okay. Well, so you are aware that you're aware of the characters in it, right?
Yeah.
And are you a Marvel Comics reader at all?
Once upon a time, long ago.
Okay. So Sentry factors into this, right? It was from the, and it struck me as I'm watching this that I'm like, right. And this is nothing in the movie. This is, from the comics, but like, even with Sentry, right? Even a comic book character, you're dealing with this archetype of like this guy who so wanted to be special, right? This guy who could be both hero and villain in a coin toss because the thing that's driving him isn't the desire to do good so much as the desire to do something meaningful, right? To have an impact. And I think where there is the connective tissue between Starkweather and, as Tom alluded, the mass shooters of today, anything like that, is the idea of wanting to matter ends up mattering more than any effect that the actions might have.
And that is such a distinctly American thing, almost a plague at this point of how, like Tom mentioned earlier, like it's a very American thing, this rebelliousness that's inherent in us. You know, we're a nation founded on rebellion. There's also this thing that has been forced onto, you know, the people in general, but boys and men in particular, of you're important, you're important, you're special, blah blah blah, all of this. So you have this fucking plague, man, of men that think like just because they exist they're owed something, whether it's, you know, fame or money or women or whatever. You know, it's this striking thing. And another reason why the Badlands, this Starkweather thing is so, while it may cross cultural bounds, as our favorite Kiwi here loves the story and wanted to adapt it on his own. It's just so American, and you know, like with the Springsteen connective stuff, which is, you know, with Springsteen, so much of his songwriting, from, you know, Jungleland to the entirety of Nebraska, or a lot of the darkest songs on Darkness on the Edge of Town or The River or what have you. So much of his stuff is about these blue collar men that are different than the other blue collar men around them, because they have this sense about themselves that they should be better than this, that they shouldn't be stuck in these dead end jobs. You know, oh, I could have been a musician, I could have been this, I could have been that. You know, one of the things me and Mike have always talked, earliest connections we had with was in college, and talking about Springsteen, and how one of the most you know, the river, the song in particular, is such a haunting song and so connected for us, and for me in particular, coming from a very blue collar home and having a lot of blue collar jobs. Like that line, you know, on my 19th birthday I got a union card and a wedding coat, and you just go, yeah, fuck, if like you're the kind of guy that gets sucked into these kinds of jobs, but you were like, oh, I wanted to be an artist, or I wanted to do this, but I got stuck because I knocked someone up, or I wasn't good enough at this other thing. And you start getting these resentments and this bitterness. And yeah, it's such an American thing. And I do love that this doesn't show him as like a raging psychotic the way a lot of the American men with that kind of mindset have, but just almost to the point that he's so far gone believing that it's even possible, that it's like on a nihilistic trip of just, well, okay, the only way I could do this is just by killing, and you know, I'm just gonna do that, and that's about it for me.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah, you know, it's what a movie, right, guys? Good pick
What
there.
a great movie. Yeah, I mean, I think it's that anti-authority myth making which is so intoxicating. And my kind of long-standing pet theory is so much of this Trumpian world that we live in at the moment is built around the idea of that same vein of anti-authority or anti-authority, whatever you make that out to be, whatever authority looks like to you, and being like, even against all the logic and all the like facts and all the things that are very demonstrably corrupt about this person, he represents the antithesis of all the authority that is out there, that is just like making my life miserable, and so I'm going to damn myself in order to be like, fuck you, you can't do what you I won't do what you tell me.
And yet, and this is the thing that's fascinating too with that in particular, right? Is that if Donald Trump represents the epitome of anti-authority in that regard, right? Like what you're saying, you know, for certain people, of like telling the system to go fuck itself, right? And yet, some young kid in Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
who wanted nothing more than to be seen as special, took a shot at him.
Yeah.
Right. And I was thinking about it because I'm going to throw one more thing at you, Tom Augustine, but like, I don't know what your relationship is to musical theater. But are you familiar with Stephen Sondheim's Assassins?
It's actually showing here in Auckland at the moment. There's a revival of it.
Go.
Yeah.
Go as soon as you can, because that is another guy meditating on violence. Now, obviously, he's dealing with presidential assassins, right? But the opening number of the show is this unnamed figure, this narrator, who has lined up all of the people who have ever shot at a president. And the opening song, the ethos, this thesis statement that Sondheim sings, or Sondheim has him sing, is everybody's got the right to their dreams. And it's them singing like, well, hey, buddy, everybody's got the right to be happy. Don't stay mad. Life's not as tough as it seems. If you keep your goal in sight, you can climb to any height. Everybody's got the right to their dreams. But the song is about how, like, listen, man, it doesn't matter if you're just a little guy with nothing. With this gun, you can shoot the president. And that's it. The girl is going to want you. Jodie Foster's going to want to go out with you. Hey, buddy, the pain will stop in your stomach if you just shoot the president. The union will collapse if you shoot the president. Right? And this fundamental, I was thinking of that when you were talking about like what that kind of represents in this idea of freedom and this whole thing of like, at its core, what is this about? It's this young man who's like, well, I deserve to be happy, right? I've got the right to be happy. As an American, I've got the right to be happy. And if I'm not happy, I have the right to shoot as many people as I have to until I feel happy. It's the same thing. And it's, talking about us trying to fathom this stuff and trying to make sense of it. It's the same thing as like, again, 4 U.S. presidents have been assassinated in this country, right? Yes, John Wilkes Booth arguably did it for ideological reasons, or his career was falling apart and he wanted to be more famous than his brothers, so he latched onto the Confederacy. But, like, everybody has a hard time believing, oh, Oswald acted alone, or Oswald did this and that. Meanwhile, you've had 2 other guys shoot, William McKinley and James Garfield, and why did they do it? They were crazy and wanted attention, and they wanted to be special. And, why did we shoot Reagan? To impress Jodie Foster, because I want to be special. And why did Charles Manson order the death of all these people? He wanted to be a rock star. He wanted to be special. There's no difference here other than the fact maybe that Starkweather, because he was an innovator in the field, he didn't know how to, use the media to his advantage like these later people would,
And which is interesting because the movie does end with him having his little moment of celebrity with the cops, which ties into that thing I was saying about how like there's this pop culture element to the Starkweather story, which he may not have used it, like you said, the way some of the others down the line would, but he did have the country in his grasp for a few weeks. His case was this big thing, and he was important, quote unquote, and special and what have you. He kind of broke the America's just consciousness, and he shattered something before the 60s even started, and the 60s started going through all the fucking mayhem that really crushed America's spirit for seemingly ever. I don't think we're ever getting over what happened the entire 60s, but I think there's also something interesting about this movie, and because this movie's so not didactic that you could like not, you could rewatch this movie 100 times and pick up new little things that he's sort of working with in his storytelling, which is that another very American thing is that this guy doesn't feel special or powerful or whatnot until he picks up a gun, and no one pays him any attention until he aims a gun at them. He becomes a celebrity because he picked up a gun and evaded capture for what, like and I think in the movie it's like 10 days they basically are on the run. But it's this very a very American poisoned thing in our souls that gun culture makes a lot of men feel like they they need a gun to feel powerful, especially if you're a guy who's been told you're special and that in America you need to be special, but you're not. And you're feeling like, oh, well, everything I've wanted to do is not working out. So, kind of like what Mike is getting at is let me pick up a gun and kill some innocent people or shoot at a president or what have you. That there's this, you know, the which is another thing that I think is interesting about this movie too, which is that the connective tissue of Warren Oates ties this feeling. It feels like this ties into what Peckinpah was getting at with his movies and his westerns in particular, which is one, his views on the horrific nature of violence, that it's not something to glorify, but also the changing societal mores, that this kind of lifestyle just like it can't exist anymore. We're like like in almost like in Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, he's kind of ambivalent about the progressive future, that they might not be great, but there's also like, well, we are progressing. You can't just be a guy who picks up a gun and shoots people to settle disputes or make a name for yourself. That in 1959, in parts of the country, it might still look like, especially the way Malick is shooting it, it might look like the Old West. There's not a lot of society around. There's a lot of just environment, a lot of nature. But you can't just do this anymore, because then you go into a town and it's like, all right, here's cars, there's this rich guy, and all this stuff. Just like we can't live like this anymore. Like what? Maybe at a certain point when we were a little less civilized, but there are still people that are living like this, that still have this in our brains. And even today, 50 years after Badlands, we still live in a world where people have their "Don't Tread on Me" shirts, and their "I'm a gun owner and I tell my wife to make me dinner" shirts. And it's like, fuck, we're still living in this Americana that shouldn't exist anymore, and yet so many people, almost half the country, are trying to make it that way. And yet so many of us will look at this and be like, but we get past this? Like when we connected towns via telephone wires, when we built the fucking railroads, once we started connecting beyond our little tribes that we couldn't get, if someone was in California, it was essentially like, well, never seen them again. Fucking motherfucker I'm talking to right now is in goddamn New Zealand. Like, with the fact that we're now at a point where this is something that is even possible, and there's not even like a delay. It's almost like he's in the fucking room with me. And yet people still want to just live in a world where, like, oh, well, this guy threw a trash can into this CVS during a riot. That means he should get shot, right? We should shoot people for property destruction. Like, bro, that was a fucking 100 some odd years ago when that was the thing we did. Aren't we past this? And I think what Malick is almost prophetically looking at is that, no, we're not. There's people that will just not, that there is a deep rot in this country. And, coming out after the Vietnam War ended, having that little element that Kip is a Korean War vet, that there's just something in this country that violence is just like has a stranglehold on us and on the men of this country. Because we've talked about all this, like Sissy Spacek, just straight up, like, the longer the movie goes on, the more and more confounded she is by this guy.
Yeah,
it's just like, I don't get him.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier Cormac McCarthy, and I think he's one of my guys as well. And he talks about, so much of his stuff is about how America was like birthed in blood. Like Blood Meridian is pretty much like that is what it is. It's that connection where it was like the foundational element of what America is this kind of bloody intersection of violence and freedom however you define it, I suppose. And that scene at the end where he kind of is commanding an audience is so, that is the scene that is truly the prophetic one to me in Badlands, because um, after all of this kind of dreamy drifting, all of a sudden Malick is just zeroing in and making this very precise point. It's almost like when the rest of the world kind of finally comes into collision with their world, suddenly you snap into focus. And yeah, I don't think it's unintentional that it's pretty much the end of the film. I can't quite remember. It's pretty close to the end of the film. And it's the thing that you leave on. It's the thing that you sticks with you, is like, this will happen again and again and again, because we're inexorably drawn to something intoxicating about that violent, the thing that connects us right back to the source of America as it started, you know?
Well, I think with that, there's also an element, and I don't mean to be too much, but you mentioned Cormac McCarthy, right? Cormac McCarthy is certainly somebody who could watch Badlands and say, this is bad. This is an example of America bad. The bad elements of America. And yet, as we learned last year, Cormac McCarthy also carried on a romance with an underage girl who he trafficked across state lines.
Totally.
The father, Warren Oates' character, right? Regardless of what we know about him, the film very pointedly kind of sets up these parallels between him and Sheen's character. I think there's something that all of us can probably interpret in different ways about the fact that this movie, it begins with Sissy Spacek in her bed, just like Bonnie and Clyde, right? With her dog. And it's her with her dog. And then when we meet Martin Sheen, he's found a dead dog by the side of the road because he's a trash man. And this dog corpse has just been left there to be tossed in the trash. And he asks somebody, he's like, I'll give you money if you eat this dog. And then Warren Oates shoots Sissy Spacek's dog as punishment for, quite frankly, as punishment for becoming an adult, right? As punishment for becoming a young woman. And I think all of that is to say, like, you're talking about this element of violence, right? And why I brought in the Cormac McCarthy and everything is, like, I think at its core, the interesting thing is, as Americans and as men, we can be repulsed by things that we know when somebody else does them, they're abhorrent, right? But it's different when we do it, right? Like, you can watch Badlands and go, I hate this guy. This guy sucks. Unlike me, who has total reason to do the things that I'm doing.
Well,
it's different when I do it. Think about the fact that, like, the reality of it is, right? I think if you sat down, you're talking about, Tom made this comment about, like, a guy threw a trash can through a CVS window while people are rioting, right? Oh, we should shoot him, right? The fact of the matter is, the interesting thing about this is that, as we all know, in the summer of 2020 and then in January of 2020, there were two ideologically very different events of mass protest in the United States. And if you sit the average American down and you go, do you think we should have been lighting people up with guns at one of these two protests? I think you would be alarmed at how many people go, yes, at one of them. They'll have different ones, right? They'll have different ones. But at the end of the day, the conflict that we have as Americans is this thing that we can't ever actually apply the things that we believe about other people to ourselves.
Well, that's...
And this thrill killer thing, like, and it's at the end of the day, it is that thing that we all have to deal with in terms of, like, Tom was talking about, like, when we were 15 and we had romances and what have you, right? I think about the fact that, like, when I was in high school, right? I won't, I'm not going to name it, but when I was in high school, I was supposed to go to prom with a girl, and then her parents were like, we don't want you around her because you're a bad influence, right? And I remember at the time, I was a young man being like, this is ridiculous. You're coming down on me, man. We're young. Let us live. You were young like us once. Don't you get it? And yet now, I don't have any children of my own yet, but I am old enough now to look at that and go, yeah, I wouldn't let my kid go out with that guy either. He had a leather jacket and he smelled like Marlboro Reds. I wouldn't let her around him either. But we all, not that everybody was Charles Starkweather or anything like that, right? But like the central conflict that all of us have is, is that transition we have from the boyfriend who the girl's dad doesn't want them hanging around to the dad who doesn't want the daughter hanging around with that riffraff boyfriend. We can never apply that stuff to ourselves, but we can apply it to other people.
Well, speaking of the protests, it connects to what Tom was saying before about how the ending with him holding court amongst the cops, that scene is so fucking haunting, and especially because, as Mike brought up, in January of 2020, there was a bit of an issue in DC. I'll just put it that way.
Mild
and
whoopsie.
a mile oops, if you would. And quite famously, someone got shot and killed during that oopsie. A woman named Ashley Babbitt. And the fucked up thing about all this is, which is like Mike is saying, you sit people down and they'll pick ones based on their political affiliations. It's so weird to me because I live in Long Island, and where I go out to hang out or drink or whatever, there's so many people that I grew up with or just interact with on a daily basis that are cops. And they will straight up tell you that Ashley Babbitt getting shot was wrong. And I go, what? But you guys are cool with mowing down people that destroyed a CVS or a storefront that you have nothing to do with? They go, yeah. And I'm like, you guys don't see a difference between these two things at all, right? Like, you don't, like, the fact that all of these people, and not just Ashley Babbitt, attacked police officers, much like Sheen's character in this movie does, but you guys are going to be like, oh, but they shouldn't have shot her. You guys just aren't getting this, right? You guys aren't seeing the connections here.
I'm going to be honest. I'm wondering if we're going to hear from listeners who are as confused as I think I am, and maybe Tom Augustine is as well. I won't speak for you, Tom, but I have found myself at multiple points in this episode. Tom Lorenzo has gone, I go to these bars and I see a lot of guys who remind me of Sheen and this character, and they suck. And now it's like, I go to these bars and I see these guys who are like, and I think like there had to be some people wondering, what? Maybe go other places. It seems like these are bad places.
I do, but it's also Long Island.
Don't like.
But it's also Long Island. It's just a bad place, man. It's like it's basically like Target. Compared to like it's Target, where it thinks it's bougie, but at the end of the day, it's just Walmart with a better set of paint.
I just like, that would be like, imagine if we were sitting here and Tom Augustine was just like, yeah, we all here in New Zealand, we all go to this one restaurant chain and everybody gets salmonella every time. You'd be like, stop going there.
I do. There's a lot of drinking holes in Long Island, and most of them are filled with dickheads, so I have to do the rounds and basically finish them all up and then start from the beginning again. It's not great. Life as a single man is not fun. I'm sorry.
It's like that episode of The Simpsons where Homer gets banned from Moe's and drifts from bar to bar trying to find his place.
It's funny you say it that way, Tom. I was thinking it's like Homer Simpson and his sandwich, where it's like, you keep getting sicker, stop eating the sandwich. And he's like, no, I've still got some.
I mean, look, there are places, you talk about the places here that give you salmonella. There are somewhat questionable areas here to dine where something about it keeps drawing you back. I can't say that there isn't. It does happen from time to time. Something that did strike me when you were talking before is I was just thinking about what a blessing it is really watching Badlands that Malick made the decision to tell it from Sissy Spacek's character's point of view, and to give her so much interiority to the point where she is the point of view. She's the narrator. It's not just the Starkweather story. It's the relationship between the two and the way that she observes him, and putting us in her point of view is I think it's what allows this film to be so enduring and so timeless, and how it allows that kind of myth making around Starkweather to be turned on his head, where it's like, okay, here's this guy who is like quite pathetic, and if he's ever endearing or briefly likable or whatever, it's because you're kind of like, oh my god, look how pathetic he is. And I think, yeah, I just think it's kind of amazing that Malick decided to tell the story in the way that he did.
And
I don't know if other filmmakers would have.
and it's and that stuff is so striking when he has the moments where her narration doesn't match up to what we're seeing in the movie. Like the scene where the quote unquote bounty hunters come to them in their little makeshift home in the woods, and he just guns them down, and she's like, oh well, he said he overheard them talking about their bounty hunters and they were coming to get them. And you're like, but we never saw that. So he just shot 3 guys because 3 guys were coming, and he just needed to make up a bullshit excuse to seem like, oh, like I did it for a justified reason. Or at the end when he's in the car chase and he just stops, and she's like, oh, he said he got a flat tire, but I think he was probably lying the way he was talking about it. And you see, like, yeah, he was lying. He just shoots the tire, and he just has his moment. It seems like and again, just that element of not really understanding why, that he just stops and just has his moment. I just those little moments, like you said, especially in the 70s, for as much as we can revere the 70s, the new Hollywood era, the film brats, all of that, filmmaking took a big leap in the 70s. We can't ignore the fact that it was a very male-centric upgrading of the filmmaking status
Definitely.
quo. That it was a lot of guys, very guy-centric. For every, all these guys maybe made one movie about women. Marty has Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. Spielberg has Sugarland Express. For the most part, all of these guys essentially are making movies about being men and the whatever issues they're dealing with. Most of the time being, hey, what if men went fucking nuts because America's crazy and, everyone's losing their fucking minds. Which is why to loop back to what Mike was saying about like American men specifically can have this cognitive dissonance of not knowing, of like doing the things that they don't like other people doing. It's why like the connectivity to Peckinpah fascinates me, because I would have loved to know what he thought of this movie, even though by this point he probably would have been maybe too far in the bottle to fully process it. But he was another guy, maybe, which is crazy to say that Peckinpah might not have been the worst of the two, but that he may not have been worse than Cormac McCarthy, in that I don't think we have stories of Peckinpah trafficking underage girls around the world. Mainly just, Peckinpah was a drunk and he yelled a lot and he tried to be a bully, but people would beat him up and he would, learn his lesson. But again, he was one of the guys like, I'm trying to exorcise my demons of all this shit through these movies. But then again, you look and it's like, but he was kind of a fucking maniac. So and to your point, we're so lucky and blessed that Malick is a sensitive enough filmmaker and storyteller to know that the end to this story is the woman, because the guy is not someone to focus on, because then you might get guys that misinterpret the movie and be like, oh, this guy might, is actually cool. The Fight Club effect, basically.
Yeah.
But by this framing and having the narrator of the movie tell you constantly, oh, he's kind of dumb. He kind of says stupid shit that doesn't make sense. I don't know why he does anything he's doing. And he died 6 months after the cops caught him, because everyone, the justice system was just like, yeah, no, you killed 10 people. Like, you're going to die. Like, fuck you. Like, for all your celebrity, you're still just a loser who killed people for no reason. So
to jump on that point that Tom Augustine made about centering women, I also think one of the things that makes this so impressive and even impressive today, not to be too critical of today's cinema, but like not just in the 70s, even today, is that like it's very easy now for us to make fun of this, but it's the thing of like how many movies are like, it's a movie about trauma. right?
Oh God, yeah.
And I don't love our current relationship to the idea of trauma,
Totally.
insofar as, like, to me, what makes this film so impressive is it's a film about her resiliency, right? It's a film about it's a film about not just her resiliency, but the fact that, like, even as she's telling you this narrative, right? Even when all this is going on, she's wondering about, like, there's that point where she's saying, you know, what does the man who's going to marry me look like? Things like that. You know, it's this thing did not break her, right?
Mm.
And I think when we're talking about these other men, even when they make movies about women, right? It will be about, like, how often they rely on, like, sexual violence as this thing that, like, utterly destroys this woman, right? And at its core, that's a very puritanical idea, right? Even when it's these guys going like, no, but I want to make a drama about sexual assault. It's like, but if your stance on sexual assault ultimately boils down to this, like, puritanical idea of, like, well, if this happened to this woman, she is spoiled forever, right? Like, that's not actually that
Mm.
progressive, man,
Mm.
right? And I worry culturally that that's where we're leaning in a lot of ways, right? That's what we're going back to in how we depict things and how we talk about these things are,
Well,
like,
I mean,
these women are, you know, are fragile objects that can be destroyed, or quite frankly, people telling their own stories like they're fragile objects to be destroyed. And what I so admire about Sissy Spacek's character in this movie is she talks about this, quite frankly, not dissimilarly to how you hear certain people talk about, like, you know, if you were talking to somebody, you know, especially older people who are in their, like, 50s and 60s now, and you're like, wait, so when you were, like, 19, you had an affair with, like, a artist in his 40s.
Mm.
And, like, today the internet would go, well, that's an age gap and that's problematic or whatever. But when you talk to those people, they go, you know, I found that an enriching experience. You know, it was good until it wasn't. And, you know, I learned from them and they gained from me and what have you. And it's more a story of, like, yeah, there were ups and downs, but, you know, I am the person I am today, right? This did not wreck me. This did not destroy me. This is one chapter in a story. You get the sense that this is one chapter in her story, as opposed to this defines her.
well,
She can never be whole, you know?
well, you know, talking about the '70s again, you know, the rise of the rape revenge movie, and how many
Yeah.
movies use that as, like, oh, the woman gets destroyed, and now she, you know, whether it's the good ones like Last House on the Left or Miss 45, they still have that element you're talking of that, oh, it shatters them completely, and they, you know, they become gun crazy maniacs, or their parents become gun crazy maniacs, or whatever. Where, you know, again, to bring up Peckinpah, which is kind of like, as controversial as the scene is, the rape scene in Straw Dogs, where it happens and it's traumatic, but it's not like, you don't get the sense that this is a thing that is going to, like, she's going to become a fucking basket case that is, like, barely human for the rest of her life after surviving that siege on the house. And, you know, to connect it back to you know, this other point you're making about the way we talk about trauma or anything today, we're in a bad place, man, where the youth, they do not have sex, they don't like talking about sex. Movies are getting more and more prudish and just absolutely afraid to deal in realistic talks about relationships or sexuality, just in all types. And yeah, you know, if you make a movie like this, which is why when they make movies like this now, they take away the element of the age gap, or the fact that she, or even not even an age gap, just that she's a child. They always, you know, even them out age wise. Even the good ones like Natural Born Killers or True Romance, or, you know, one of my favorite titles to just bring up and have people go, oh yeah, remember that movie happened, Queen and Slim. You know, everyone's favorite, Queen and Slim.
Yeah, that's Stone Cold classic.
Where it's, you know, for as much as we can criticize many elements of the '70s, like that it's only men making movies essentially, and all of that, at least you can look back on those movies like this and say, well, shit, at least they, in some some movies, some regards, you had filmmakers that had enough emotional maturity and storytelling sensibility to say, well, wouldn't it be more interesting if we did it this way and it wasn't just this simplistic puritanical point of view? And which again is interesting, since Malick is, even though we know essentially nothing about the fucking guy, he just makes movies and just disappears and nobody sees him or talks to him. There is a heavy spirituality throughout his work, and a so not to say he's a Catholic filmmaker or whatever, or like Schrader, who's a Calvinist guy who's a fucking maniac in his own right. There's a spirituality, and he could have leaned. He could have fallen into that thing of, oh, if you get raped, you're spoiled, blah blah blah. All sexuality's bad. Where no, he's just like, no, like,
it's very true to life.
It's just there's just an honesty to this movie, for as dreamlike as the photography and storytelling can be with the narration and all of that. You know, this is still the nascent phase of his career where he doesn't go full blown into that, you know, very dreamlike camera going through the wheat stuff. This is a tight 90. But there is an honesty to it, you know, and I think that's the thing that essentially keeps people coming back to it, is that, yeah, this just feels like, as heightened as this story is, it's like, yeah, no, these are real people. Sheen's character might be a more extreme version of a real guy, but she's someone, you know, and this is another thing where if you talk to women these days, because, you know, if they feel comfortable enough with you, or in general, women are more comfortable talking about this stuff now. How many fucking women have just bad stories of bad guys they've been with in their day, or that not even been with, but that men have done horrible things to them. And you just like, it's almost like you talk to every fucking woman and just like, Jesus Christ, like, all of you are dealing with this? And they're just like, yeah, but you know, I dealt with it. And you're like, fuck me, man. Jesus.
That is that is very much the way it goes. That is very true about the way those conversations have gone when I've had them in the past. But have you guys seen a film called Smooth Talk, Joyce Chopra's Smooth Talk from 1985?
No, I'm aware of it. Like, it's one of those ones that's on the proverbial watch list, but I've not seen it as of yet.
It's to my mind, it's one of the great American films, and very much in conversation with Badlands. It would make for a really, really fascinating double bill with Badlands. I mean, it's all the stuff we've just talked about.
Oh, I know what this movie is. Yeah, I've got the fucking Criterion. I just have to watch it. Yeah.
Pop it on, man. It's an incredible experience. Tense, terrible, powerful. Laura Dern in one of her first roles, incredible, just like star-making performance. And Treat Williams plays this just like a dirtbag, fucking scumbag rapist who the entire second half of the film is like this one scene basically that plays out, and it's just terrifying and exhausting and kind of incredible. And it's all the stuff that we've just been talking about you know, the kind of relationship between sex and violence in America, and sexual violence, and a woman's point of view of that, and the way that it's taken on, and it scars you, but you have to just keep going because this is America and this is the way it works, and blah blah blah. And it is fascinating because it feels very in conversation with Badlands. It does. The character that Treat Williams plays in this film feels like a natural evolution from Starkweather and Badlands. He is handsome, he's charming to a degree, it's all an act. He's dressed himself very consciously to try and emulate this kind of sexy guy. He's much older. It's really worth watching, and very much all the stuff that we've been talking about has just put me in the mind of, okay, this is actually very similar in a lot of ways.
I'm gonna put it on the short list on my table over here to watch it soon enough. And just also bringing up Laura Dern, you know, it feels like David Lynch's work feels very connected to Badlands and that sort of
totally.
I mean, Wild at Heart in particular, but how much of his storytelling is about women and the sexual violence that they have to, you know, deal with throughout their days?
I was actually going to bring that up specifically in terms of like, there's that shot everybody loves to repost from Wild at Heart, where Laura Dern is stomping on the bed in the hotel, and it cuts to their feet dancing. And how much that relates to the way Malick shoots their feet dancing when they're when they're together. Since we want to be respectfully to him, I think we're going to go around, kind of do some quick hits of things we should have mentioned or wanted to mention if anybody has them, and then wind down with our Oscar talk as we always do. But the two things I want to make sure we highlight: one is the xylophone score, Gassenhauer, the 1920s composition by, I believe, Carl Orff and Gilda Keatman. That xylophone composition has appeared in, I note here, True Romance, Ratcatcher, Finding Forrester, Monster, Capitalism: A Love Story, Priscilla, Mad God, and 2 different episodes of The Simpsons. And the other things that I wanted to just put out there: number one, this film is very ambiguous. You can read into it a million things, like we talked about, right? But God bless him, there's one moment of very on-the-nose symbolism of this film, which is, maybe you guys think of something else, but when Sissy Spacek is reading a magazine, and it has 2 names on it, James Dean and Tony Perkins. Rebel Without a Cause and Psycho. You can't get more on the nose than that of Zavin. And the last thing I want to put out there is the fact that we have alluded to the fact that nobody knows what's going on with Terrence Malick. He is very, a private man. There's like one photograph of him, right? So you would say Terrence Malick, that is a man who is camera shy. That is a man who does not want to be seen. He doesn't want to be perceived. He's in the fucking movie.
Yeah. Yeah. That
it
made me laugh
you
when he pops up.
Yeah. When you're just like, you are one of the most... That would be like if you opened Thomas Pynchon's first novel and he's like, my name is Thomas Pynchon. Here's a picture of me. Here's my address. Write me fan mail. He'd be like, what?
And
this has been available this whole time?
It's still the enduring image of him. It's still like our understanding of what he looks like and shit like that. It's crazy. Have you guys ever seen the TMZ clip that went around a while back where he was walking around with Benicio del Toro?
Yes.
And they were going up to interview Benicio, and they didn't even realize that Terrence Malick was standing next to him the entire time. Amazing
stuff. So for me, just 2 things to bring up is that I think its induction in the registry is well earned, but I think it's interesting that it comes in so early in '93, the 5th year. It almost feels like the registry and the people a part of it were sort of being like, maybe we should lionize this guy, because I don't know if he's ever going to make a movie again, because this is 5 years before Thin Red Line. He'd basically been gone by this point, whatever the math is, like 15, 16 years since Days of Heaven. He was just gone, and it feels like, oh, we had this guy who burst onto the scene with these 2 amazing, epic, just gorgeous, lush movies, and where is he? Let's throw him in the canon, just in case we never see him again. And then, he would end up doing some of the best work of his career. And also the second and final thing I would like to bring up is that for as polished and amazing as this movie is, it's crazy that the production of it was an absolute nightmare, made for, almost no real money, made with basically a skeleton crew. He went through 3 fucking cinematographers. One of the prop guys got, badly injured in a fire during the house burning down sequence because one of the crew fucked up and threw a match where they shouldn't have. He had to stop shooting the movie for a while because he ran out of money and had to do screenwriting jobs to get money to finish the movie. And if you watch this movie, one, you'd be like, oh, is this like a guy 15 years into his career making like his 10th movie and he's just got it all down pat? And 2, you would not even think that any issues befell this movie at all, because you're like, this is just a pristine technical like masterpiece in so many ways, and you're just like, wow, an absolute fucking nightmare to make this movie. So kudos to him on that.
Yeah, I think the one of the things I wanted to also talk about was how it was a nightmare to make, and it seems like Days of Heaven was also a bit of a nightmare to make, and maybe that's why he took such a long break. I mean, Also, there's an interesting parallel between the Starkweather character and Richard Gere's character in
Yeah,
Days of Heaven too, which we didn't dig
yeah.
into, but it's quite an interesting correlation. Otherwise, yeah, just backing up what you said about the xylophone score, one of the most enduring pieces of music in American cinema. Also, this film just has like the best poster
Oh
of all
yeah.
time of any movie. I don't know, one of them. Yeah, just a fantastic film.
So, winding down as we always do. Tom Lorenzo, how do you think this film did at the Academy Awards that year?
I'm gonna say mm, nominated for cinematography, and that's it. I don't. Yeah, I don't know. Best picture, maybe. I don't know.
That is very ambitious of you. The correct answer is it was nominated for no Oscars. This is an interesting year, however. The Best Picture nominees that year were American Graffiti, Ingmar Bergman's Cries and Whispers,
Wow.
The Exorcist, A Touch of Class, and the winner, The Sting.
Wow.
So a good lineup. However, you should also note, this is the year some guy had his dick out on stage. So, this is the famous year that there was a streaker at the Oscars. So, American rebellion in all its forms is on display in this year, is what I'm saying.
And yet, not as embarrassing as calling the shot with Chadwick Boseman and missing.
Nope. So that is that. Tom Augustine, thank you so much for joining us.
This was amazing, bro.
Again.
Absolutely amazing.
So happy to have you. We look forward to having you back on again.
Absolute pleasure.
But before you go, do you want to plug anything? Do you have things you want to plug? Let folks know where to find you or what you're working on or any such thing.
I do film reviews, weekly film reviews for a publication here in New Zealand called View Magazine. So the URL is viewmag at viewmag.co.nz for New Zealand. That's also where you can find the podcast Point of View, which is a monthly podcast, just sort of previewing what's coming up. We talk to a local filmmaker or critic or something like that. I'll have to get you guys on at some point in the near future. And yeah, that's it, really.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for joining us. But everybody else, stick around. We'll be right back with our picks for the National Film Registry.
The National Film Registry isn't some fixed object, frozen in time. It's always growing, adding new titles every year. These annual selections are made by the National Film Preservation Board, with members like Martin Scorsese, Alfre Woodard, and Leonard Maltin, and representatives from organizations like the Academy, the DGA, and the AFI coming together to debate and decide. But they don't just pull titles out of thin air. They pull from the public, people like you and us, who can submit their nominations for the registry in a form on the Library of Congress's website. What we do, at the end of each episode, is have Mike and Tom pick films not yet in the registry that they feel should be, inspired by that day's topic. At the end of each season, those films will be formally submitted to the National Film Registry for consideration, on behalf of You're Missing Out. Here are today's picks.
So, we alluded to a number of films in the episode that are directly inspired by this, by Badlands and the Starkweather story. But I decided I was going to go a slightly different direction. It's still in line with this, but we were talking about the relationship between violence and sexuality in American cinema. We were talking about kind of the transgressiveness that Starkweather represents. And that got me thinking of a filmmaker who is, I would say, lesser known. You could call him an experimental filmmaker, you could call him what have you, but a gentleman by the name of Richard Kern, which I want to stress, Tom, is not Richard Karn from Home Improvement. They're two different guys, okay? I just didn't want you getting your hopes up here. Richard Kern. Richard Kern was an underground filmmaker in kind of the New York East Village scene of the 80s. His films are what we would call part of, it was termed as like the cinema of transgression movement. Remember, New York in the 80s, a very different energy. And the film that I'm thinking of in particular, I could have picked a number of his films. They all kind of have that same energy of like youthful rebellion, but like the darkness of youthful rebellion, the unpleasantness of it. These are not appealing films. These are films with just again, to evoke that Springsteen line, there's just a meanness in this world. The film in particular I chose is from 1985. It's an 11-minute short of his called You Killed Me First. A young girl raised in a deeply religious home. They're critical of the way she dresses. They're critical of the way she is. And spoilers, she kills them. But of course stresses that, well, as the title suggests, you killed me first. Like all of Kern's films, it's jarring, it's aggressive, it's in your face, it's confrontational. I think, you kind of have to have a Richard Kern in the Registry to represent that period of New York, that period of the cinema of transgression. And like I said, I could have picked a number of ones. I think my ultimate settling on You Killed Me First comes both from how directly it relates to the energy of Badlands, but now, as opposed to Badlands, which is a story of, 1950s America and the darkness there. This is a film in the 80s when America is nostalgic for the 50s. So, a real contrast there. And also, quite frankly, because a lot of Richard Kern's other films have a lot of nudity and genital mutilation and things that we'll never be able to get the Library of Congress to induct. So this is about as good as we're going to get in terms of approvable material. So my pick is 1985's You Killed Me First by Richard Kern.
So, going straight forward here, not pulling a Tom pick, no weird curveballs, no weird logic here. Straight shot. I'm going with True Romance. I mean, it uses the music. It's not coy about the connections to Badlands. It may trade in subtlety for a brash maximalism, but it works in that regard. It especially taken in context with the fact that Tarantino wrote True Romance and Natural Born Killers as companion pieces, so they like work as dark flip sides of each other. And this one sort of, where Natural Born Killers is more of a Bonnie and Clyde, dark, fucked up, violent movie, True Romance has sort of Badlands' tragic romanticism to it, where at least, not exactly like Badlands, but Clarence and Alabama are not vicious psychopaths. They're just caught in a bad situation and have to do what they got to do because they love each other. But there's also the trade-off in Tarantino, which, I mean, it's Tarantino. That's kind of all he did in the 90s. But taking the pop cultural element of Badlands that I was talking about in the episode and sort of bringing it to the forefront, that Clarence is very clearly a movie nerd, comic book nerd. He seems to be basing a lot of his appearance and aesthetic on Elvis, to the point where there's scenes in the movie where he's hallucinating talking to Elvis, as played by the late great Val Kilmer. I think it's a great movie in its own regard. It's one of Tony Scott's best, and I think Tony Scott, for whatever people want to think about him, is a better, more important filmmaker than maybe people would give him credit for, and this is one of his best. It's also another example, pre-Pulp Fiction, of how important Tarantino was going to become to the world of cinema. And I just think as a companion piece, updating the Badlands story, or at least structure, to the 90s and what that looks like as compared to a 1959 set movie filmed in the 70s. I think True Romance definitely deserves its day in the sun, and pair it up with Badlands, and you've got yourself quite a little double feature there. So that's my pick, True Romance. Get her done.
Next week.
Hey guys, Tom here. We're going to be off next week for the holiday. So instead of listening to us, go out and have a little 4th of July party. Or, don't, because, a lot of shit going on. So, if you're not feeling patriotic, can't blame you. Or maybe the world's already on fire. Who knows? I can't make these predictions, nor can I make you do anything. We'll be back in 2 weeks, maybe, talking about the movie Cat People.
You're Missing Out is a production of Neon Night Media. It's hosted by Mike Natali and Tom Lorenzo. The show is produced by Kyle Lampar and edited by Mike Natali and Kyle Lampar. More information about our hosts and guests are in the show notes. Thank you to Amanda Rush for our social media, and all of you for checking us out.
If you're listening right now or want to take the show on the go, every episode is available as an audio podcast. Follow You're Missing Out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, please leave a review and a rating. It helps folks find the show.
Want to watch the show or watch some of the films along with us? Great, that's why we're doing this. Don't leave us alone out here. Check out our YouTube channel. We've got video versions of every episode, uploads of some of the National Film Registry titles we're discussing, commentary tracks, and live streams. And once a month, I'll be uploading some content that's exclusive to the YouTube channel. So be sure to click subscribe and hit that little bell to be notified as soon as new stuff goes up. Because, let's be fucking real, I ain't sticking to a goddamn schedule.
So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
And we'll see you next time.
And you'll see us next time. Because we don't watch you, you're watching us.